College Literature, Arts, and Lecture Series. If you are here for the first time, please sign our mailing list and we'll send you something. It'll be a different color, but it'll be a schedule like this, either via email or snail mail, whatever you prefer. And I just wanted to mention ahead of time that we have books for sale by Major Jackson today. You probably saw them when you came in, and I know that he will sign them for you. I've already bought the most expensive one there, and he signed it. And it's a great book. So it's a real treat. Before I introduce him, I wanted to say a little bit about what's coming up. Next week, we have a hip-hop performance artist, Paul S. Flores, and he does monologues and spoken word. You can get his flyer out there. He's supposed to be really fantastic. So hopefully you'll come out for that. And it's called The Chicano Messenger of Hip Hop and Spoken Word. And then the week after that, we have Sephardic music from the Mediterranean. And I'm only going to mention this. I don't want to go through the whole schedule, but on those of you that are here because you love poetry, we have another poetry reading on April 20th with the local poet, Marcia de la O, so hopefully you'll come out for that as well. So I'm very excited to have Major Jackson come all the way from Vermont. He's just arrived from LAX, catching his breath. He's the author of Roll Deep, Holding Company, Hoops, and Leaping Saturn, and the winner of the King Poetry Prize and finalist for National Book Critics Circle Award in Poetry. He's the editor of County Cullen Collected Poems and a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Pushcart Prize, and Winning Writers Award. And he served as Creative Arts Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. He's a Richard Dennis University professor at the University of Vermont and serves as the poetry editor at the Harvard Review. So let's give him a very warm welcome.
Good afternoon. I apologize. I'm arriving not only from LAX, all the way from Vermont, but I'm also arriving with a cold. And the altitude change did something to my ear. So if it sounds like I'm yelling, I apologize. Something happened here. It's a pleasure being here at Oxnard College, and I want to publicly thank Shelley Saverin, who to me feels like a force of nature. She approached me about reading here and made it happen, and I'm very grateful. As I believe in the great fellowship of readers and writers that art, particularly the literary arts, create. So it's such a pleasure to be here with you. I will read maybe 30, 35 minutes, and then if you'd like, I'll be very happy to answer questions about writing my poems. I won't take questions about the election season. I won't do that. I'll start off with a poem that probably was, of all the poems in here, the first poem that I wrote some time ago. That I wrote because when giving readings around the country and flying, several times I had been asked by my seatmate on the plane, what did I do for a living? And for the most part, I would say I was a teacher. I wouldn't say I was a poet. Unless I wanted to go to sleep. If I said I was a poet, and that stumps them. Oh, you're a poet. And then that would be the end of that. But someone asked me, well, why do you write poetry? And I was stunned by the fact that I did not have a kind of off-the-shelf, ready-made answer for them. And this is what triggered the poem. I went to my hotel and started this poem. I didn't finish it, but I started it. Why I write poetry? Because my son is as old as the stars. Because I have no blessings. Because I hold tangerines like tennis balls. Because I sit alone and welcome morning across the unshaved jaws of my lawn. Because the houses on my street sleep like turtles. Because the proper weight of beauty was her eyes last night beneath my eyes. Because the red goblet from which I drank made even water a Faustian toast. Because radishes should be banned, little pellets that they are. Because someone says it's late and begins to rise from a chair. Because life is ordinary unless you plan and set in motion a war. Because I have not thanked enough. Because my lips moisten whenever I hear Mingus's goodbye pork pie hat. Because I plant winter vegetables in July. Because I could say the morning died like candle wax and no one would question that truth. Because I relish being sent into the coat room in 3rd grade, where alone I would turn off the lights and run my hands over my classmates' coats as they're playing tag with their bodies. Because once I shoplifted a pair of Hawaiian shorts and was caught at the Gallery Mall. Because soup reminds me of the warmth of my grandmother and old aunts. Because the long coast of my dreams is filled with saxophones and poems. Because somewhere someone is buying a Rolex or Piaget. Because I wish I could speak 3 different languages, but have to settle for the language of business and commerce. Because I used to wear paisley shirts and herringbone sports jackets, because I better get it in my soul. Because my grandfather loved clean syntax, cologne, Stacey Adams shoes, Irish tweed caps, and women, but not necessarily in that order. Because I think the elderly are sexy and the young are naive and brutish. Because the vision of trees only comes to wise women and men who can fix old watches. Because I write with a pen whose supply of ink comes from the sea. Because gardens are fun to visit in the evenings when everyone has put away their coats and swords. Because I still do not eat corporate French fries. Because punctuation is my jury and the moon is my judge. Because my best friend in 4th grade chased city buses from corner to corner. His father could not stop looking up at the sky after his return from the war. Because parataxis is just another way of making ends meet. Because I have been on a steady diet of words since the age of 3. I've read that poem so many times that I could probably look away from the page and recite it by heart, but not today for some reason. After coming off a plane, feeling a little disoriented with a cold. I also have conversations with myself when I'm reading familiar poems, and in that particular instance, I was thinking about a line break that I probably would have done differently. Here's a poem called Mighty Pawns, and it's about a group of chess players that I grew up with in Philadelphia. They were kind of a ragtag group of chess players at this middle school that I lived down the street from called Vaux. And they had a very dedicated teacher who taught them the game, and they became so good that they traveled. They traveled all over, and Hollywood made a movie about them called Mighty Pawns, but they were known as the Bad Bishops. Mighty Pawns. If I told you Earl, the toughest kid on my block in North Philadelphia, bow-legged and ominous, could beat any man or woman in 10 moves playing white, or that he traveled to Yugoslavia to frustrate the bearded masters at the Belgrade Chess Association, you'd think I was given to hyperbole. And if, at dinner time, I took you into the faint light of his Section 8 home, reeking of onions, liver, and gravy, his 6 little brothers fighting on a broken love seat for room in front of a cracked flat screen, one whose diaper sags, it's a wonder it hasn't fallen to his ankles, the walls behind doors exposing sheetrock, the perfect O of a handle, and the slats of stairs missing, where baby boy gets stuck trying to ascend to a dominion foreign to you and me, with its loud timbales and drums blasting down from the closed room of his cousin, whose mother stands on a corner on the other side of town all times of day and night, except when her relief check arrives at the beginning of the month. You get a better picture of Earl's ferocity after school on the board in Mr. Sherman's class, but not necessarily when he stands near you at a downtown bus stop in a jacket a size too small, hunching his shoulders around his ears as you imagine the checkered squares of his poverty and anger, and pray he does not turn his precise gaze too long in your direction, for fear he blames you and proceeds to take your queen. Stand your ground. My friend Terrence Hayes invented a form called a golden shovel, which takes its shape from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem in which, almost in a acrostic fashion, along the right margin, you write towards one of her poems or a line from one of her poems. I chose a poem called Beverly Hills, Chicago. We do not want them to have less, but it is only natural that we should think we have not enough. And of course the title alludes to Florida's new law that allows protection, fatal protection if one feels threatened. Stand your ground. America, how often I have applauded your flagpoles. We, as citizens, struggle to find common ground, yet do much to damage the planks of your art. Not a soft tune we make, glissando of the harmonized. We have a want problem, more of ourselves problem, us versus them in the great race to prosperity. In his introduction to metaphysics, Heidegger asks, why are there beings at all? We have, as guides, clansmen and eugenicists who proclaim all others as less. It is, I admit, the slapping of your ropes, tolling a perfect union, but is the measure of your worth a silent clang elsewhere? How is it a ripple also runs through me when your wind rises? Your cloth is nation, hauled down or half-mast like a deferred dream. Only earthly because we strive on paths hidden by dead leaves. That an angry man can shoot a teenager is par, as we say. We, iotas, deltas, crits, knights, new tribesmen, and new codes, should in earnest put away our swords and talk shows. Think, our watermelons have so many seeds, and we, galaxy in us, dissolve like supernovas. The mysteries we have, an unmitigated burning of sound and fury, not organism of one, but organs. America, I've had enough. I would like to read a poem that is based on a painting by Romare Bearden, and it features the Greek figure Calypso, who, as you'll remember, stops our friend Odysseus and keeps him on an island against his will, and then finally, after the gods intervene, she lets him go. And Bearden does a fantastic job of painting Odysseus in this garden, Calypso's magical garden. After Romare Bearden, it's bad when a man doesn't own his dreams, a faint head full of the scent of a woman, her special claims and beguiling herbs arched in the crevices of his ears like plugs of gold, his scorched mind far from wife and kids, tears turning his eyes to pebbles splashed by briny waves. Possessing no firm farewell, she makes his body a slave. No will in her cavern, no choice to rise up a god free of the banal pattern, no leaving her roughshod, her chocolate scattered, clutching ardent notes. Instead, on the immortal ladder of her limbs he climbs and dotes. Her braided hair, her bangled wrists, the garden's chimes, their afternoon mangled in bits and chunks of time. Even the birds, stilled to a silence by the unannounced show, a man wearing the crown of the island until she lets him go. On Cocoa Beach. I am revisiting the idea of Florida, giving my vertebrae a vacation from all the faded bouquets of urine in New York and the darkened policies of snow in Vermont. I am revisiting the idea of my wife's imperial gaze. Her 3-cheese quiche and fluted mimosas are the masters of my mornings. I am revisiting the idea of lawn furniture. By late afternoon on Sundays, my face blossoms like a passion of lilies as I admire the spectral grace of the sandhill crane, or am caught lost thinking of Castillo de San Marcos and the first people Temiqua. I am revisiting the idea of light and laughter and skin half transported by wind. I like to think of myself beside the crepe myrtle, pondering the logos of palm leaves and the kindnesses of beaches. You can have your sororities of pain in darkened subways. I will give myself to the great battles of clouds and surfs. This book has a number of poems that were written while I was traveling, and they range in a number of places. Someone asked me recently how productive am I as a writer when I'm traveling? And frankly, I'm not that productive, but I do take enough notes and try and immerse myself in the culture enough to feel like that it's entering into my body, entering into my bones, and thus entering into the language that I use. This takes place in Spain after a visit to the house of the poet Federico Garcia Lorca. That stretch of mountains features white windmill blades, whose slow turns are rifles aiming. But I cannot help but think of Lorca's killing between here and the village Alphacar. And the firing squad's gun pops are that flamenco dancer's hill stops I bring back to her brisk hand claps and the cantor's Andalusian moans like dried sticks or bones crumbling in his throat. Only souvenir shops and steep winding streets accrete in this region's stacked brochures. Her dress spills across the restaurant's floor like a red shadow, darker than billboards of black bulls high above roadways, motionless but seeming to gallop like Franco's brigades. All seen is an act of war. Tanks and artillery, Spanish castles and moss. I choose to lose, and beneath a watercolorist sky, study DD splendor, nude against the unruffled backdrop of the Alboran Sea, whose waves match my size, and bomb this beach, launching sprays of white duds. Even if he'd pulled over to study Andalusia's road signs, after 1001 nights, he still cannot make out its calligraphic script, its vertical lines, its dots, marks like smoke stilled from incense, its curled, sand-soft Arabic. But this city's voice has coffins, incarnations, and each hoarse singing shoots through him like 12 bars of earthen road that lengthens into a labyrinth of knowing blood beneath black skin. So more echoes. The Alhambra sent him back to the seraglio of his youth, where a Moorish guard stood in the museum, unfazed by a harem's rising laughter behind palace doors. Here are pillars and banded arches to once again imagine the body passing through like a key into infinity. Was this the answer to his ghetto past? But why travel so far? Since a child, even in sleep, he voyaged and broke free, tossing dice in dreams, once below deck on a caravel next to grains of paradise. He's collecting 1,000 faces. He's moving beneath eyelids, turning time into flesh. Don't judge him. The courtyard's orange trees, where once he watched like a Morisco, is teaching his tongue the craft. When did this? Ugh. There we go. I bet you that's better. I apologize. Okay. So this is called Mr. Pate's Barbershop, and it's based on an actual person in my neighborhood growing up, a gentleman who did not have kids, but he kind of adopted everyone in the neighborhood. And this would have been at a time in which in Philadelphia there was the social epidemic of drugs. And Mr. Pate, when I went off to college and come back, he would often share a story about someone that I knew who wasn't so fortunate as me. And I always thought these were cautionary tales. And so that's something you should know about him. And you should also know that as kids, we passed around a rumor that Mr. Pate never threw hair away, that in fact he kept it in jars in the back of his shop. Mr. Pate's Barbershop. I remember the room in which he held a blade to my neck and scraped the dark hairs foresting a jawline. Stacks of ebonies and jets, clippings of black boxers, Joe Frazier, Jimmy Young, Jack Johnson. The color television bolted to a ceiling like the one I watched all night in a waiting room at St. Joseph's while my cousin recovered from gunshots. I remember the old Coke machine, a water fountain by the door, How I drank the summer of '88 over and over from a paper cone cup and still could not quench my thirst. For this was the year funeral homes boomed, the year Mr. Pate swept his own shop, for he had lost his best little helper to crossfire. He suffered like most barbers suffered, quietly, his clippers humming so loud he forgot Ali's lightning left jab, his love for angles, for carpentry, for baseball. He forgot everything and would never be the same. I remember the way the blade gleamed, fierce in the fading light of dusk, and a reflection of myself pant inside the razor's edge, wondering if I could lay down my pen, close up my ledgers and my journals, if I could undo my tie and take up barbering, where months on end a child's head would darken at my feet and bring with it the uncertainty of tomorrow. Or like Mr. Pate, gathering clumps of fallen hair at the end of a day in short, delicate wisps, as though they were the fine findings of gold dust he'd deposit in a jar and place on a shelf, only to return Saturdays, collected as an antique dealer collects, growing tired but never forgetting someone has to cherish these tiny little heads. I'll read two other poems from my first book. I haven't read these in a while, but some friends are in the audience who I know might enjoy these. This poem references the jazz musician Freddie Hubbard, and it also, for anyone, I would say under 22, there is a reference to something called a cassette deck, which is what we had in our cars, and we popped it into this thing and it played cassettes. Indian song. Freddie Hubbard's playing the cassette deck, 40 miles outside Hayes, and I've looked at this Kansas sunset for 3 hours now, bristling as big rigs bounce and grumble along I-70. At this speed, cornfields come in splotches, murky yellows and greens abutting the road shoulder, the flat wealth of the nation whirring by. It's a kind of ornamentation I've gotten used to, as in a dream, espaliered against the skies blazing, cloud luffs cascade lace-like, darkening whole fields. 30,000 feet above, someone is buttering a muffin. Someone stares at a sky phone, and momentarily a baby cries in pressurized air. Through double-paned squares, someone squints, fields cross-hatched by asphalt strips. It is said Cezanne looked at a landscape so long he felt as if his eyes were bleeding. No matter that, I'm heading west. It's all so redolent, this wailing music. By my side, you fingering fields of light, sunflowers over earth, miles traveled, a patchwork of goodbyes. This is How to Listen. How to listen. I'm going to cock my head tonight like a dog in front of McGlinchey's Tavern on Locust. I'm going to stand beside the man who works all day, combing his thatch of gray hair, corkscrewed in every direction. I'm going to pay attention to our lives unraveling between the forks of his fine-toothed comb. For once, we won't talk about the end of the world, or Vietnam, or his exquisite paper shoes. For once, I am going to ignore the profanity and the dancing and the jukebox so I can hear his head crackle beneath the sky stretch of faint stars. Picket monsters. For I was born too in the stunted winter of history. For I too desire the lion's mouth split, and the world that is not ours, and the wounded children set free to their turnstiles of wonder. I too have blinked speechless at the valleys of corpses, wished Scriabin's black mass and the executioner's ear, Ellington in the interrogation room. I now seek gardens where bodies have their will, where the self is a compass point given to the lost. Let me call your name. The ground here is soft and broken. My first book is titled Leaving Saturn, and it takes its inspiration from the jazz composer and big band leader Sun Ra, whose grave I visited in Birmingham, Alabama about a couple weeks ago while I was there in Alabama. But that might have just been a cover for Sun Ra would tell audiences that he wasn't from planet Earth, that he was from Saturn, and that he was here to save planet Earth with his music. And I want to share a poem with you that follows his journey. I grew up in Philadelphia, and he lived about 3 blocks away from me, and sometimes you could walk down his block and hear his healings. I won't call it music, I'll call it his healings. Leaving Saturn, Sun Ra and his year 2000 Myth Science Orchestra at Grendel's Lair Cabaret. Skyrocketed, my eyes dilate old copper pennies. Effortlessly, I play manifesto of the one-stringed harp. Only this time I'm washed ashore, shipwrecked in Birmingham. My black porcelain fingers, my sole possession. So I hammer out equations for a new thing. Ovid and Homer behind me, I toss apple peelings in the air and half-hair brushstrokes. The upkick of autumn leaves, the orchestra laying down for new dimensions. I could be at Berkeley teaching a course called Fixins, How to Dress Myth, or Generations, Spaceships, and Harlem. Instead, vibes from Chi-Town, must be Fletcher's big band music. My brother, the wind, I know this life is only a circus. I'm brushed aside, a naif, a charlatan, too avant-garde. Satellite music for a futuristic tint, says one critic. Heartbreak in outer space, says another. Luna dust on the brain. I head to New York. New York loves a spectacle. Wet pain of cement, sweet scent of gulls swirling between skyscrapers, so tall, looks like war. If what I'm told is true, Mars is dying. It's after the end of the world. So here I am, in Philadelphia, here to save the cosmos, here to dance in a bed of living gravestones. Okay, 3 more poems. And living in Vermont, I very much like to get outdoors. And one of my favorite trails to walk is called Mount Philo. Ode to Mount Philo. After avocado-colored inclines, after dawdling ascents over fern and foliage, after long trillium gazes and careful steppings over outcrops of rocks, which if not careful could trip to foil after delicate trail talk of marriages and births, dates remembered, coral squash, the tentative pace of the new in-law, the sure-footedness of the long ago loved. After stop-offs to catch breath, a swig, a quaff, to take this much in, midway up journey, this resting place, to further peaks and crests. After foothold and climb, after storm's last sculpture of fallen trees, you, summit of my life, philosophy of sky, you embezzler of breaths from big and small mouths, so that all whisper your spread out tabernacle, a new religion. You ritual burst of mountain light and sparkling lake, for which we line up, taking our turns, and spawns of clicks and screams, panorama of foothills like green coats thrown open, clouds, if only we could reach and cup our hands, and below a stitched patchwork of land, lime pastured like flattened squares of kale. We look, we marvel at how far we travel through emerald, glitter, and beam. This is a poem. A lot of poems for me either begin with a memory or an image, but sometimes with a sound, as you can probably hear. And this particular poem had to do with disappearing. I have not disappeared was a phrase that I heard for a long time in my head, and writing the poem became a way of disabusing my ear of this phrase. But I was very happy to have written this poem, for several reasons. One of them being that there's a moment in which I pay homage to my ancestors, which for a long time I wanted to write about my immediate family, as well as those long ago distant souls that somehow account for my existence today. So I'm proud of that. But the poem was published online at the Academy of American Poets, and it somehow got in the hands. It was published on September 11th. They didn't tell me that it was going to be published that day, but they published it, and I heard from several people who had lost dear family members for whom this poem had served as a salve. Which, interesting enough, you write poems and you can't imagine their use in the world, but somehow they find their audience. On disappearing. I have not disappeared. The boulevard is full of my steps. The sky is full of my thinking. An archbishop prays for my soul, even though we met only once, and even then he was busy waving at a congregation. The ticking clocks in Vermont sway back and forth, as though sweeping up my eyes and my tattoos and my metaphors. And what comes up are the great paragraphs of dust, which also carry motes of my existence. I have not disappeared. My wife quivers inside a kiss. My pulse was given to her many times in many countries. The chunks of bread we dip in olive oil is communion with our ancestors, who also have not disappeared. Their delicate songs I wear on my eyelids. Their smiles have given me freedom, which is a crater I keep falling in. When I bite into the two halves of an orange whose cross-section resembles my lungs, a delta of juices bursts down my chin, and like magic makes me appear to those who think I've disappeared. It's too bad war makes people disappear like chess pieces, and that prisons turn prisoners into movie endings. When I fade into the mountains on a forest trail, I still have not disappeared, even though its green facade turns my arms and legs into branches of oak. It is then I belong to a southerly wind, which by now you have mistaken as me nodding back and forth like a Hasid in prayer, or a mother who has just lost her son to gunfire in Detroit. I have not disappeared. And my children, I see my bulging face pressing further into the mysteries. In a library in Tucson, on a plane above Buenos Aires, on a field where nearby burns a controlled fire, I'm held by a professor, a general, and a photographer. One burns a finely wrapped cigar, then sniffs the scented pages of my books, scouring for the bitter smell of control. I hold him in my mind like a chalice. I have not disappeared. I swish the amber hue of lager on my tongue and ponder the drilling rigs in the Gulf of Alaska and all the oil-painted plovers. When we talk about limits, we disappear. In Jasper, Texas, you could disappear on a strip of gravel. I am a life in sacred language. Termites toil over a grave, and my mind is a ravine of yesterdays. At a glance from across the room, I wear September on my face, which is eternal and does not disappear, even if you close your eyes once and for all, simultaneously, like two coffins. I'll end there. Is it customary, Shelley, to take questions?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Ask away. Don't be shy.
There'll be a quiz after this. Yes, sir.
It sounded as though.
Speak up, though.
Absolutely. It seemed as though, coming from your first book, Leaving Saturn, that your sound of your words was very musical, and you could hear these complex rhythms. At least I could. Did you feel that you were working towards that? Did you feel that you were trying to make music for people to listen to while they were reading?
Thank you. That's a very kind question. I think to some extent, I advanced the music before the meaning. And I think that's owed to the kind of poetry that I liked growing up, but maybe even more so finding myself as early as a kid playing quite a bit of my grandparents' music. And it was a ritual almost to have the music in the house almost day and night. So language is very much for me like what the scale might be for a composer of music. I try to play the tunes, play the notes, and hopefully more than the semantic meanings of the poems, more than any theme or subject matter, that ultimately is the first order of impact for readers. Thank you.
If I see you in the parking lot, I'll be able to talk to you.
You started, now you can go on a roll. Yes, Chef.
This is an educational institute. Can you talk a little bit about your process of writing? Every poet writes differently. And so I'm just, and you write a lot about, inspire a lot about people around you, your family, people in your neighborhood. But what happens when you write a poem? What is the process that a poem goes through for you?
Well, it varies, as you probably well know, and because of the place and the pace and the demands of my life, there's not much consistency unless I will it so, and I go through various kind of periods of anxiety, particularly when I'm not writing. So I'll sit down in the mornings. Normally, it used to be very late at night, but these days, the mornings. I think the phone is a great invention, and I'll get these ideas, and I have a whole collection of emails to myself called Poem Idea. And if I'm really being assiduous about writing, I'll keep a journal with me and write it down rather than send myself a note. And when I go to sit down, I'll visit those ideas, and to my surprise, they've been a great source. But I enjoy the poems most that surprise me by their own assertion, which is to say, I have a whole host of memories behind me back there that have never left me. And those are the poems that kind of insist on being written as a way of breaking the spell. And I definitely believe in revising as part of how I teach, and also something I feel as though, if, however, the revising of the poem, if the same amount of energy is brought to revision as the energy that brought itself when it first presented itself during the creative act, then I think I'm pretty assured that I'm going to go somewhere, because I get into this reverie that makes all else around me disappear. And I think the writers in the room know we call it the zone, I guess. That's a beautiful, wonderful place to be. It's safe, it's dangerous, it's all of that at once. And I guess I live for those moments. What comes out of it is almost incidental. It's almost like the writing is part of it's the saving grace of existence, so to speak. So less a process and more me kind of managing time such that I'm really carving out moments in which I get to think and exist and be with myself rather than the crazy workaday world. Yeah. Hi.
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 Hi. Do you find that when you write something and you maybe put it aside and take a little time to sit with it and come back to it, that it increases the complexity of making those revisions? Maybe you have lost track of a rhythm, or you've lost track of something that's alive in there
Yeah.
that ends up challenging you?
I think it's good to put away poems, mainly because I think life needs to happen to make you a better to help sharpen your vision when you go back to it. And sometimes the poem that's written, now granted, I have poems that were written in one sitting. Most, I would say, have kind of presented themselves that way, but the moments where I go back and I'm not feeling it like I did, but I know probably that needs the most work. I've been talking about this essay lately that I think more people should read, called Poetry and Ambition by Donald Hall. And in it, he talks about Horace, the Roman poet, who would write a poem and put it in a desk, or put it away. I don't know if they had desks during this time, but let's assume, put it away for 7 years. 7 years, and then he would come back to it. And again, if it had that same intensity as when he first wrote it, he knew that the poem was done. Hall doesn't talk about whether or not he revises it after that or tosses it, but I like that idea, even if I can't put away a poem for 7 years. No. Barely 7 days, you said, that's fine.
Can you repeat the name of the essay?
It's called Poetry and Ambition. Well, thank you very much,
Okay, let's go.
Oxnard College.
5 books.
Yeah,
Then let's sign them.
I appreciate it.